Okay, we're going to start with the 9000 M2 series overview. First off, we're going to start with additional features and improvements, and then we're going to go through the product overview, and then we're going to head on to software overview as well, and basically go from there and go over each section. Within each section, I will explain a little bit more than what you'll see in the slides. I'll kind of go into depth of more what is associated with each component as well as the software, and we'll basically start from there. Okay, first we have additional features and improvements. Now what you'll notice is there's quite a few different options and improvements on the new M2 series compared to the older version. I'll go through a few of those now just to give you a heads up. First, we have a faster PC to unit communication. Now in the past, when you had original 9000 series units and you wanted to connect it to your laptop, once you did all your settings, got all your modules installed, etc., you do the communication upload. Now this usually took about approximately 5 minutes. This has been considerably improved now. We're looking at a complete configuration upload of about 30 seconds. Next up, we have a new serial port setting wizard. Now what this allows us to do is do a complete test and configuration basically of your serial ports. Now before we had a lot of technical calls regarding the serial ports with laptops, USB converters, etc. When you hook it up to the machine, you get their error message saying not communicating. Now that what they've put in is the software is we have a testing software section that will allow you to actually test your serial port and make sure the settings are all there and make sure you're actually getting communication back and forth from the machine before you actually even do an upload or download. We also have a new consolidation of the mixer matrix mode. This has been totally removed, so now we don't have a switch on the back of the unit anymore. There's no mixer matrix switch on the back panel anymore. This has been totally removed. And what has happened basically is we've taken both of those features and combined them into one complete system. So it's basically a morphed mixer matrix mode all into one. Before, you kind of had to know what you wanted to do beforehand in order to build a system up. Maybe you want to do a mixer setup before of just routing inputs, or a matrix with assigning and toggling on different inputs, outputs, etc. Now it's all been done into one, and it's reflected as well on the software itself when you do your programming. We also have 4 new additional keypads. Now these keypads are a little bit different than the current ones. They do require a different cabling setup as well, and their own module, which we'll get into a little bit later on. These basically allow you to do a lot more functionality with the system. That allows routing of cross points and other features, such as turning sources on and off, etc. I'll get into that a little bit more later on. And lastly, we also have our preloaded additional speaker EQs. Before, on the older system, we only had approximately 15 speaker EQs loaded. Now we're up to well over 30. These, of course, are all the TOA speakers, and these are all preloaded now in the software. Okay, so additional features improvements continued. We have a new telephone paging function. Basically, with the ZP module before, we were kind of limited to what we could do with it in regards to the page port and rig signal mode. You had your manual connection. You had to basically hit your pound configurations to your zones. So now we have 3 different options we can choose from. We have the manual, auto, and group settings. The manual will work the same way before. You basically dial that ZP module and manually input, say, pound 1, etc., to go to those specific zones that you assign to those keystrokes. Now, with auto connection, this is an additional feature. What we're able to do with this is you predetermine your zones that you wanted to hit before, without basically doing your button configuration. So now, what you're basically limiting the people from doing is, say, they pick up the phone, they hit the page button. Now they don't have to hit the pound 1, etc. as well to access that zone. You're actually predetermining that in the software as an auto connection. Lastly in that section will be the group setting. This will give you predetermined groups that you've assigned. So now we can do multiple zones within groups manually without doing the individual keystrokes. Now we can hit, say, the pound 1 and assign that as a group of, say, 3 zones instead of doing, say, pound 1, 2, and 3. And lastly, in that section as well is we got an extended connection time. Now, before we had a connection time of up to 30 seconds. This was good, basically, when you just want to do an instant page. But what if you had the situation where you had, say, a pre-recorded message, and that went beyond the 30 seconds? That would actually get cut off, and it wouldn't be able to page through. So now we got 2 options. You got your 30 seconds, and now we have 10 minutes, and those are basically configured by yourself via the software. You tell it what you want it to do, and it'll connect to those predetermined times. Next up, we have our improved GUI for PC programming. It's a more streamlined approach now. There's not multiple windows that keep on popping up, and you have to go back and close those and kind of see what you did before. It's all quite streamlined. You'll have 3 areas, main areas that you'll see when you fire up the software. And it'll basically show everything you need. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. I'll show you an example of that. Another option they've increased and improved on as well is the faster front panel programming. They kind of give you more features, but they've limited the amount of button pressing you have to physically do on the front panel. So, again, we do recommend PC programming the way to go because it's a lot more easier and simpler to do. But if you do like to press buttons from the front, it's definitely another option, and obviously it is now a lot more quicker. VFD display off feature is now standard on these units. This basically now times out after 20 minutes of non-use. So basically you program the unit, you leave it static. After 20 minutes, it'll basically turn off and have a scrolling text saying, please, press button in order to come back on. Everything still works in the background, just so the text itself keeps on scrolling and basically increases the life of your VFD display. Other last feature on this, of course, would be it is compatible with current modules and keypads. So there's no new versions you have to go with. If you're replacing a unit or if you just want to continue on and you're familiar with the current lineup, it will work with all existing modules and keypads. So now we're up to the product overview. It's essentially the same model lineup as before. Obviously, we've got the new keypads, which we'll go over here. Now we have the 9060S series, 9120S series. That's your single output 60 or 120 watt series. Let's have the 240 watt version. That's a high Z option. And then we got our dual channels, which are our more popular units, the 60 watt dual or the 128 watt dual, as well as just the mixer unit only. So essentially you got those different models there to choose from. Now, depending on your job application, your source, amount of speakers, etc., you want to go with, you have quite a bit of options there to choose from and to choose the right unit to go ahead with. Take a look up below there. We have our new RC module and our ZM keypads. Now, the RC module on the left is strictly for these new keypads. It cannot be used with the older generation keypads. They still connect via the back panel on the physical chassis itself. But when you are using these new keypads, you must use this RC module and the associated power supply. So if you quickly take a look there, you'll see the 911 there was strictly a volume knob only. The 912 is a 4-button option. The 913 will be the 8-button option. And then the, again, more popular 9014 units is a 4-button with a volume knob. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, what is the real main difference between the old and new? Because you don't really have a comparison there. So we have this little chart here to kind of go through all the differences. Feel free to read ahead here. I'm just going to go through these quickly here, the main points. Now, on the older series, we had the number of presets was basically 32 scenes or 32 events. So it was either or. We didn't have the combination of using both. So what we have now in the new series is 32 scenes or 32 paging events. Again, on the older series, the number of modes was always 2, either mixer or matrix. That was done with a physical switch on the back panel. Now that's been combined into basically 1 on the new series. Paging priorities used to be 8. It's been brought down to 4. We've basically, from feedback from the customers and stuff, but 4 was quite sufficient. Actually, 8 was never used, so that's been brought down to 4. On the older series, the number of maximum controllers you could use on a given system was 4, and that was with the addition of the C module. Now, if you take a look beside that to the right, now you're looking at a maximum of 20. Now, that's a combination of using the C and RC module. Now you can imagine what differences you can do building up a system with 20 different remotes doing different things. The display of speaker EQ presets, if you're familiar with using the software in the old system, when you chose an EQ from the pull-down menu, it would actually show you the curves on the graph, which was kind of frustrating because you'd always think that, okay, I'm choosing that EQ for an F122, but it's not actually physically showing me on the screen there, so I don't know if I've chosen it correctly or not. That's been corrected, and that is now in the new software. So every speaker that you do choose, the EQ will be properly loaded and actually show you what the EQ curve is on the screen. ZP paging module. Mode, before again was just the 1, this is the manual, and now we got the 3, which I touched on earlier, is the manual, auto, and group selection. Programming is basically the same, basically with the software, but now the multi-view software on the new series obviously is a lot more streamlined and easier to use. These remote types, original series was limited to 3, and now we have up to 7 different remotes that we can use on the new series. Now, the button functions on the older series was limited as well, from your preset change to volume up down, channel on off, emerging mute, page activate, etc. The new series, you'll have all that. On top of this, you'll have the new modules, which will allow you to actually change cross points and assign different inputs to go to different outputs with the press of a button. Configuration file formats, not a big difference here. Again, it was mixer or matrix. Now it's basically an MX2 file, and that's basically saved to your hard drive when you save the system that you've designed. Now, keeping up with the product overview, let's go to the new keypads here pretty quickly. I know we touched on before. Now, keep in mind that all these new Now, keeping up with the product overview, let's go to the new keypads here pretty quickly. I know we touched on before. Now, keep in mind that all these new keypads must use the RC keypad module, so that will take up a slot, obviously, on your chassis, depending on which configuration you go with. On this unit itself, you can have up to 16 keypads wired into this RC module. It does require a power supply, which is AD246, so depending on how many keypads you have, you'll need either 1 or 2. If you take a look at the picture there, the top section, you'll see the power inputs. That'll be for up to 8, and the second one will be more, basically from 9 to 16. Again, the 911, 912, 913, and 914 are all displayed at the bottom. Each one basically gives you different options. I mean, you can have a 4-button with a volume control if you wanted to, or have an 8-button with a volume control. So you can definitely mix and match these depending on how your system sets up. You're not limited to each keypad is only doing a certain thing. They all can be programmed any way you would like. So keep that in mind when you're building a large system. Now, these keypads do require Cat5 shielded cable. Do keep that in mind as well when you are going installation that it has to be shielded. So now you may be asking, well, why would I want to go with the new keypad? What's the difference? I mean, they look similar to the older ones. What am I basically gaining by going with the new style keypad? Well, the new multifunction keypads allow you to do additional controls. Anything from scene changing to loading. So now with a button press, like the older series, I can actually load up scenes. The one key addition right now on these new series is changing the cross points. Now, this was brought up years ago that everyone wanted to basically toggle on or route different sources or different inputs to different outputs. We can now do this with any of these new keypads. I can press button 1 to have input 1 go to output 3. I can press button 2 now to go take, say, input 3 to go to output 1. That's all assignable and configurable via the software. We also do initiate paging. So now we can do, say, a microphone setup with an 8-button keypad and give you 8 zones of paging. We also toggle the contact output if we want to. You can assign buttons to trigger any of the onboard C-outs or additional C-outs on the module. It also gives you individual input or output volume control if so equipped. So now with that volume knob, like in the older series, we were limited to basically assign that knob to either one input or one output. Now what we can do is take multiple inputs assigned to that one knob, or multiple ins or outs, etc., basically assigned to that one knob. Now it's either or. You can either have, say, all your inputs assigned to the one knob, or a certain amount of them, or you can have all your outputs assigned to that one knob, or only a few of them. Nice little visual indicator there, as well as the LED indication. Basically, on/off, the green lights come on, as well as your level on the right side there gives you a visual indication of what's the volume kind of level you're at, basically. Now, I did touch on basically what we could do with keypads, and here's basically where you would sign it. So what we've done in this configuration example here is I'm taking a 9014 keypad and assigning these different buttons to do different things, as well as a volume control on the actual keypad to go to an output volume. Now, I did touch on basically what we could do with keypads, and here's basically where you would sign it. So what we've done in this configuration example here is I'm taking a 9014 keypad and assigning these different buttons to do different things, as well as a volume control on the actual keypad to go to an output volume. So take a look there at the top. I've got button 1 that's changing my scene. That's going to, every time I press that, it's going to load scene 1. I now have button 2, which is going to pull my cross point. Now, I did touch on basically what we could do with keypads, and here's basically where you would sign it. So what we've done in this configuration example here is I'm taking a 9014 keypad and assigning these different buttons to do different things, as well as a volume control on the. So up next here we got a keypad wiring example. Now again, with the keypads you will require the RC001T module, and depending on how many keypads you have, you either need 1 or 2 power supplies. Now the great thing about this module is you can run these either daisy chain to each other or home run. So in this home run example here that we see, we can get up to 2,600 feet in total distance from the first to last keypad essentially back to that module. So it's quite a bit of difference compared to our older series. With going with this route, you're basically expanding the distance that we had before. Obviously, if you have to wire it this way. Now, if you did do it from, say, keypad to keypad, your distance does drop quite a bit. I'll show you that in the next slide. So basically, do keep that in mind. Now, this example here does show the same type of keypads. Don't think that you're limited to that as well. You can have different configurations from keypads because these are all addressable. So I can have different models of a 911, 913, 914, etc. all mixed in here without any problems. So now we're going to show you here is basically the daisy chain setup from keypad to keypad. Now this distance is dropped down to about 656 feet. So do keep that in mind as well, as if you're going into an existing application that's already existing that has the cable there and you're kind of just splicing into it. Make sure that from the first to the last keypad you're no longer than 656 feet. Again, this example shows the same type of keypad, but don't worry, we can definitely mix and match these without any issues. And again, it is Cat5 shielded, so do keep that in mind when you're running a new system for this. So we have up next is keypad addressing. You'll be wondering basically how these keypads know which one's which and which one's programmed appropriately. So on the back of the unit itself, you basically assign that dial to whatever letter or number you want, and that's addressing the keypad accordingly. So what you'll do is you'll turn the dial, assign it to, say, for instance, A, and then write that down. And then when you go to the software, you just got to remember which keypad is which, essentially, and assign it appropriately to the software configuration. So when you do your upload, it goes right to that keypad itself. Now here's your keypad terminal connection. We went through the addressing with the little dial there. Now here's where the actual keypad terminates on the connector physically. It's a 5-wire shielded connection, so you get your plus minus ground and your positive negative for your power. And basically, that's how each one is wired together. Now you will see 2 connections on there that look identical. If you take a close look at it, the first is your input side, and the second will be your output side, depending on which keypad you go with. So if you are daisy chaining multiple units, you'd be going into the top section and then out to the bottom section, into the top, etc., from keypad to keypad. Now I touched on the ZT module earlier. I did mention that it had a lot more features than the original version. It is the same module, it's just that they've basically tweaked it a little bit to give you more flexibility. So now the new paging modes, we have auto, manual, and group. Auto basically, like I mentioned before, is no dial required. It automatically connects basically once you've pre-assigned those zones in the software. Now that obviously has to be pre-assigned so it knows where it goes. Once you do that, you're basically removing a step in the phone button pressing for the user so they can skip, hitting the pound 1, etc. to go to any specific zone. Manual basically works the same way they did before. You can manually select up to your 8 zones, and you basically use it as you would as the older series worked in the past. Another new feature on that would be a group calling. Now we're able to assign predetermined groups. So before, when you wanted to do a group, you'd have to hit your pound 1, 2, 3, which would go to, say, zone 1, 2, 3. It's a little bit physically daunting task for the person. Maybe that might not be familiar with the system. Pick up their phone, access the page board, then hit the pound 1, 2, 3 page. You might forget where each zone goes to. Now we can basically pre-configure that in groups. Again, a nice little feature. It's basically a one-button press at that point, but it does go to whatever zones you've assigned to. We also can give you contact closure. I can activate when a page is initialized. Quite possible it might be set up as an emergency page. So when someone does page, they want it to trip a relay, to fire off a strobe or an audible tone, etc., in some other area. That's now a standard feature on the ZP module. We also have that adjustable connection time from 30 seconds to 10 minutes. Again, the 10-minute feature was primarily for instances where we went over the 30 seconds. And an example of that would be a pre-recorded message. Paging level now has its own volume control, so this is totally independent from your in to outputs volume association that you've done in the software before. You now have its own independent paging volume control, so you can actually have this higher or lower depending on where you set that up, which is totally independent of your output volume, maximum outputs, main volume output control on the actual unit. So let's go over to the software here quickly. I'll show you in the next few slides some examples of the actual screens that are in the software. What we'll look at mainly, though, is one thing people ask quite often is, can I use this new software because I like it a lot? Can I use it in the old series? Fortunately, at this time, it's not backwards compatible. So if you do have an original series of the 9,000 units, you still have to stick with the old software. I did mention the brand new GUI, which we'll show you in a few screens shortly. We have multiple menus that are available on one screen now. Whereas before, we'd click on your input to bring up a second screen. You want to adjust the volume on that to bring up another screen. You want to adjust the gates, etc. It'd be another screen. So that's all kind of been streamlined and now available all on different kind of smaller windows, but all on one page. We have a separate menu now for the new keypads. So this is totally independent from the actual background of the software working. You could bring up another menu and show the new keypads and go through those independently. So it's a nice little change because before, I can imagine that people kind of maybe get mixed up if they had that all on the same screen. It'd be too much information to handle. Speaker EQ now does show on the graph, which is a handy feature as it did before. And the initial setup now allows you to pull last file used. So when you fire up the software, right away you can say, I want to pull the last file I worked on, and it automatically grabs that for you as well. The serial port setting wizard, I did mention that as well before. Nice handy feature to kind of give you a little quick test of your serial port. So now let's look at the start menu. When you fire up the software, this is basically the main screen you're looking at. So right away, you can go to the browse feature, or if I just click on existing file on PC, that's going to pull up my last file I worked on. If you want to start from scratch, click on new file, you're good to go, and it goes to the main setup of your modules. We also got the serial setting wizard, which I mentioned before. Click on that, it automatically bumps you over to the serial setting port setup, and it goes through all the information you need to do to test your serial port. And lastly, you get your download 9,000 to PC. So right away, again, we can kind of go right, pull the information right from the machine right away. That's maybe you want on site, you want to pull off what's currently on that. You just click a one-button click, and it pulls that information over for you right away. So here we have the initial setup wizard. This comes up first when you do your first system or a new file. This is very similar to the original series. So you got your slots allocated for 1/8, and then basically you populate them any way you wish, depending on what kind of module you have that you're going there. We have our AA module, ZP, T module, RC, C, D modules. Depending on what kind of setup you have, how many ins and outs you have, you basically configure that this way. You can also label them manually with the names if you like. This example here, I put in like 1, 2, etc. Label my ZP module as a phone, and then your outputs as well. So here's what you've all been waiting for. Here's the new GUI. Now it obviously looks quite a bit different than the current one. You have everything you need to have basically on one screen. The left-hand side, we have our scene saving setup and loading. On the bottom there, right away, we already see our input levels. Now this is obviously mapped to wherever you click on the top. So now before, on the top section, when you click on, say, the volume button, actually bring up another window, you adjust your volumes, close it, and go back. Now when you click on anything on the top section, volume, EQ, compressor, gate, anything you click on there, now it gets populated below, and you don't lose that information on top. Everything's all kind of streamlined and looks a lot more cleaner and easier for you to use. That does applies well to the output side. If I click anything on the outputs, which is the dark blue section on the right-hand side there, top right, that all gets populated as well on the lower window. You can do all your configuration and work from it from there. So now we have an example of me basically clicking on the cross points. So again, anything you click on the top, now it gets populated on the bottom. So again, looking at inputs on the left-hand side going down, for my outputs going up from the left to right on the top, I now have my cross point selection. In this example here, all my cross points are turned on. So anything orange with a black X is basically saying all my inputs right now are going to all outputs. With a simple double click, I can turn those off and basically pre-assign and predetermine which inputs only go to certain outputs. Up next here, we're going to take a look at the AN setting. Now, what I've done on the top there, I've clicked on my ANC module. Now, the ANC module we use for bringing up the ambient noise level of the outputs of the actual unit itself. Essentially, if you have an ANC module hooked up with our ANC mics, it's constantly analyzing the room. Now, you predetermine this in the software beforehand of what the best case scenario is in a room. So when you page, you want people to hear it. Once you've done that, you pre-assign that, then you determine, okay, if that level increases 3, 6, or whatever dB level you've assigned to that, you want it to increase the output side as well as your amplifier. So any pages that you do won't be overrun essentially by the background noise. Nice little feature we have, and again, you can hook these up to any of our 9000 series. So if you take a look below there, once I've clicked on that, I've assigned my level, my range, my sample time, the ratio, and whatever output channel I've assigned that to, and basically if I want to monitor it on or off or not. Now before, when you did this, most of the time you have to do it from the front panel programming. It's a little tedious because you have to go back and forth from the front panel to do your adjustments. Now what you can do is you can do all these tweaks and settings as well on the lower left, and then when you're ready, you can just say reference level, get level, and do your adjustments there. So actually give you a reference level of the room noise when you hit the get level button. From there, you can say, okay, well, I want to tweak that another 3, 6 dB, etc. I'm going to adjust my levels. Now, if you hit adjust, it'll automatically adjust it live for you right away. And that way, you can constantly do your tweaks for your room environment to get it the way you want it to be. So let's look at our ZP module. So again, when I click on the ZP module on the top, right below now, I've got the ZP module setting. So here's your manual auto group settings. Just a click of a button. Your mode, either be from paging port from a phone system with a contact closure, or your ring signal mode, which basically is a dial-in extension at that point, and whether or not you want a pre-announced tone to go across the paging system when you do a page. Your connection time is there as well, which again was 30 seconds or 10 minutes, and this is all done in the ZP settings section. And if we continue on here with the ZP setup, here's your ZP volume output setting. Now, I did mention before, this is totally independent of your main volume output. So now you can have your paging levels, again, be either higher or lower from what's already predetermined on your main output. Again, it's a nice little feature because sometimes maybe you want an emergency page to come through and be a lot louder, but even though it's still mixed possibly, or vice versa. So you can tweak these accordingly to basically any level you want on the ZP volume output setting. So once you've done all that, you want to head over to your paging priority setting. Now, I mentioned before, we do have the 3 levels of priority, and these are, again, separate from the scene setups. So what we look at here on the right-hand side, when you click on, from the pull-down menu, your paging priority setting, this little window comes up. It gives you your channel association on the left-hand side, and then your priority levels, depending on how you want it set up. This is using the example I had before, so you'll see channel 5 and 6 are blank. That's where my ANC module mics were. So those obviously don't have a priority. What I've assigned here is my channel 7, which is my ZP module. That's going to have priority over everything else. And on the right-hand side, you got your ducting level. So for instance, when channel 7 trips, it's now going to duct channel 1, 2, 3, and 4 to off. However, when channel 2 trips, or channel 1 trips, with a priority 2, that's going to turn off channel 2, 3, and 4. But again, anything with a lower number is a higher priority, so those will not be muted as part of the priority chain. So keep that in mind as well. You got to kind of put them in order. You can have multiple channels have the same priority. So if you want to either mix it or have it as a last in, first out setup, or first in, first out setup, you can definitely do that as well. Taking a look at here, this would be our mic and phone group and zone paging priorities and outputs. So now it's another new feature. Once you click on that paging tab and you've already predetermined your priorities, you now have a window here that will give you your group configurations or your button toggle configurations for microphones. So we take a look up below. What I've done is assigned on the left-hand side input 1, for instance, which is going to be tripped via my microphone level on priority 2, and it's going to be pressed by my remote switch 1 to 4. Now that's going to be assigned on a keypad itself. So for example, number 1, which is input 1 on my microphone, when I press button 1 on that keypad, it's going to go to output 1 and 2, which is in the output channels there. So now you can think what you can do is with multiple mics or a ZP module with multiple mics, you can have different output channels assigned at any given time, or groups or single channels to go to different zones. So now we're basically building on top of what we did before, whereas you're limited to kind of the amount of outputs you were able to assign at one time. Now I can do multiple groups, I can do individual zones, I can do all zones all at one time, either with microphones or my ZP module. So here's an example here of what I've done with that previous screen with the 4-button keypad. So what I've done here is with this ZM911, I've assigned button 1, 2, 3, 4 to initiate page. They're all saying initiate page here, but if we went back to the last screen there, I've basically told that button 1 goes to output 1, 2, button 2 goes to output 3, 4, etc. So now you can bounce back and forth to have any of these buttons do different configurations to any different zones you want to page to, either being individual, groups, or an all call. Now here we have our ZM912. What I've done here is basically told the software that with this keypad, I want it to go to my output volume only, but I only want it to go to outputs 1, 2, and 5, and 6. I'm leaving 3 and 4. Maybe I have another keypad in there that's the exact same as this one, which is controlling output 3 and 4. You could have, say, multiple keypads of all the same type if you wanted to go to individual outputs. So it really depends on how you want to configure it. Either you want to assign it to multiple inputs, or single inputs, or multiple outputs, or single outputs. It's really up to you how you want to assign these keypads to do what you want it to do. Here's another example with the ZM913. This is the 8-button controller. What I've done here is assigned buttons 1, 2, 3, and 4 to load different scenes. So now I'll get scene 1, 2, 3, 4 loading every time I press any of the first 4 buttons. And I've assigned basically 5 through 8 to change my contact outputs. Now these are either level or toggle. There's 2 different options you can choose. Level will basically be a solid closure until you release it, or toggle will be on and off with every button press. And those are all assigned to button or output 1 on the contact closure. Again, you can do up to 16 depending how many C modules you put in there, as well as the onboard units. And lastly here we have the ZM914. Now I kind of give you an example of all 4 different keypads. Don't think that you can only do certain things with these keypads. I just want to give you an example of me using all the types of keypads. You can certainly do similar things with all of them. Not all of them obviously have the volume knob on there. One thing to keep in mind as well is if you do a button version in the newer style keypads, there is no option to do a volume up and down at this time. So if you want to do volume control, you do have to use one with the volume control knob. In this example here, I'm changing cross points, multiple cross points, depending on how many sources I have. So the first one up there, basically assigned it to take input 3 to go to output 1, input 3 to go to output 2, input 3, etc. So now I'm taking input 3 essentially assigned to all my outputs. And I'm also taking that volume control and taking the input side as well of all my inputs to assign that one volume control. Okay, so here's our cross-point section setup. Now when you do initiate cross-point section setup and you toggle that on and off, once you click on that next menu, this window comes up here in the keypad section. So in this example here, I've basically said when I press this button, I want input 3 to go to output 1 and 2, and also output 5 and 6. When I press the next button, I want input 4 only go to output 3 and 4. So you can turn basically single or multiple inputs or outputs on at any given time. Now we do have two modes with the software on the keypads. There's simultaneous and exclusive. Depending on how you want the keypads to operate, you choose it accordingly based on your system setup. Exclusive means when I press a button, it's only going to pull one input to one output. And once I switch to the next button, it basically blows that one out, turns it off. You can't use that one until you turn it back on. Simultaneous allows you to do multiple inputs to multiple outputs, and you can build on that depending on which keypad you go with. So you can have all four buttons lit up at any given time, all addressing and pulling different inputs going to different outputs. All right, so getting down to the final stretch here, I'm just going to show you some examples of basically different rooms and setups using different keypads, etc. So first here we got our phone paging example. So this would be an auto phone page setup. Basically, it automatically connects to desired outputs. So when that person picks that phone up, hits their page button, you've already pre-programmed this to automatically go to sales area, output channel 2 and 3 only. So again, depends how you do that, again, in your own software, how you want this to route. If you want to do it manually, you do it manual, of course. If you want to do the group, you can definitely do a group setup as well. Here's an example of a group phone setup. So now when I hit 01 pound on this phone, I'm going to output 1, 2, and 5. Now I see that's going to be totally independent and not access the rest of the output zones. But for instance, if I hit 02 pound, that's going to go to output 3 and 4. 03 pound, etc. I might only go to output 6, 7, and so on. So yeah, you can see basically how we can address multiple zone configurations within a phone system. We're not only limited now to one or pressing multiple buttons to get you to different groups that you've got to press yourself. Now you can predetermine that via the software and make it a lot more easier for your end user and your customers to use. All right, now the one big thing people wanted to do quite often was room combining, room mixing, etc. So far we're able to do 2 rooms, no problem of combining, assigning multiple inputs, outputs. Beyond that, the best thing to do would be call us and see if we're able to kind of design something for you. So in this example here, we got basically 4 different areas pulling multiple sources assigned to multiple keypads and the outputs. So if you look at the patio, for instance, that's a keypad there. It's got your 4 buttons on there. Those can be assigned to any of those inputs to turn them on and off, and only go to that patio, and you can have that output volume, for example, assigned only to the patio. So now what we're able to do is take these keypads and route our multiple inputs and assign them to our own individual rooms or areas we want to go to. Now these definitely can be shared across the keypads. So at any given time, the patio can have the DVD player playing in the patio. The kitchen can as well press the same button 1 on that keypad and pull the DVD player's information only to that area, etc. It's just the same as a satellite receiver and FM tuner going to the waiting room and dining area. So depending, again, how you configure it yourself, assign these keypads, pull those inputs, you can definitely have a large system here where you can have multiple sources going to multiple areas at any given time, and as well as throwing some microphones there to override pages and all call. All right, so we got another room combining setup here. Now what we're doing here is basically having those 2 rooms, like I mentioned before, either having them separate, you want to load a scene, now they're combined, and having a master keypad there basically assigned to pull or turn on and off those inputs and outputs. Now keep in mind that the volume control on these keypads can only be assigned to either single outputs, multiple outputs, or all outputs, or vice versa on the input side. It doesn't actually follow the inputs when you press that button. So if I press button 1, for instance, it's assigned to CD player 1, and if I wanted the volume control to adjust the gain of that, I cannot do that currently. That's hopefully something we're going to get updated on the firmware. I know a lot of people asked and wanted to definitely do that, and basically give you individual control on the front end. We can't do that at this time. What we can do is, if you wanted to, we could build up, say, with a bunch of the volume control knobs only on the front end, and then have your button selection keypad. So kind of think of it different ways of how you want to design it. If you are stuck, definitely, like I said, do give us a call. We can kind of work around that for you and give you different examples of how you can accomplish that. either via myself or Bill here in the office. We can definitely do that for you. We've done multiple scenarios in the past where we've kind of configured systems, maybe using an extra keypad here and there just to kind of give you the flexibility and the functionality that you're looking for.